All right, so we'll open our terminal, find our project, get everything all opened up, ready to go. Doesn't sound like it.
Just the old school. New Year massage.
I was thinking I put on Salama. I did opposite side.
Remember npm run dev, start your servers.
Scott, the screen keeps like.
I can see it. I don't really know if there's much of anything I can do about it, but we'll try. These crappy HDMI cables.
Do we start MEMP for the database?
Yep.
Should be running.
Nope, you gotta start map separate.
If map is pointing towards something.
It doesn't matter what the
33
Apache
cents.
server is pointing to. All that matters is the SQL database is running.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So like map can be pointing technically multiple projects.
No. So map, well, I mean, map, it points to a folder, and then it serves everything in that folder. But we're not connecting, we're not using, that's the Apache server. So we're not using the Apache server, so it doesn't matter what folder that's pointed at.
Gotcha. Okay.
We're just connecting to the SQL database that map is running.
Okay.
And you can actually install a standalone SQL database on your computer. That like you could just like use command line to start and everything.
Yeah.
Map's just a lot easier to deal with.
Kind of consolidates everything.
Yeah, and it has PHP, my admin all built in and stuff like that, so it's just easier to work with.
Gotcha. Have you ever paid for map?
No. Yeah, so you see I got an error connecting to my SQL database because it wasn't on. So you can just type RS and then enter, and that'll restart the node server. And then now I have the correct message of connected to MySQL DB.
Oh.
Restart. If you look up here at the message that NodeMon gives you, it tells you right here to restart anytime, enter RS. If you actually read the stuff that's in the terminal, it's very useful. Yeah, reading stuff, man, it helps a lot.
Those labels, like I can't come in without getting everything wrong.
So at this point, you should have your front end running, back end running, and the back end should have successfully connected to MySQL. Is anybody?
You just type npm start, right?
No.
npm run dev.
Where have you been? You remember that we set that up?
Yay. Why do you have those things over? Oh, there you go.
It's because of the.
It's just the way it's because of material. There's a way to fix it.
But on my on Windows, it doesn't.
It didn't do. I don't know why it did it the first time. It doesn't do it now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see on some people they have. Oh, I see.
It's done up to
No idea why I did it the first time.
No worries.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, if you go away and come back, it does it. They can fix it really quick.
Oh, the same thing.
Yeah.
I have it.
Yeah.
Boogie boogie. Thank you.
That's the thing that we're just talking about.
Huh?
So let's go ahead. Let's address that really fast. Everybody's up and running, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So let's go into client, SRC, components, general, form, input.
I'll tell you all of the black rock kind of
Sure.
All happen. What are we doing?
So Materialize moves these up by adding a class to them called active.
So you want to add that class in the beginning? What?
Yeah. Yeah, but you might want to pre-populate an input. So I'm going to try something. This isn't how I normally would fix it, but let's try something. See if we do an easy fix. Class name equals. So on the label, we'll add class name, and then we'll do input dot value. Oop, that's not a V. Value. So if input dot value is true, add active. Otherwise, add nothing. I don't know for sure if this will work this way, but we'll try it. Does it still work normally though? Yeah, looks like it does. Well, that was an easy fix.
Can we add any inline style for those? Because on my project, last project, on active, it's like shortest space, like last name is put in double because it's not enough space.
Too much text.
Yeah, not too much text. Not
It
enough
is,
text.
it's too much text is the problem. There's more text than the label could hold, so it stacks it.
No, in here. In different.
Yeah, it's in a different
I
part.
just want to fix.
Yeah, you could add. It's still HTML and CSS. You could add anything you want to it. You can even just you could in your CSS file you could just use the target the label and have it
Label with active and add some style like more space for it, right?
Yeah, so I don't know if they have like a max width set to it or how they're doing it, but
Sasha, are you talking about the moving?
Yeah,
It's like,
they cascading, like not cascading, like they go in two lines, and then it's not enough space for the where you're typing place because that one is coming in.
yeah, it's interesting because there's not a width set on it. That's weird that it does that.
You can shut it up so they can see what can happen. Or shut it down.
you have a max length to the label, like you can to the input. Oh, the yeah, it's actually the label wraps the
Oh, you do it that way.
You must have some kind of other thing going on.
No, we already found out it's actually it's not enough space. When you make more space, it's actually coming in. When it's active, on active, it's not enough space.
Is it longer than the input?
Yeah.
It's longer than the input itself?
No. It's like really last name, and it's going into. I talked to you.
I think I think you had something else is wrong because look how long this one is.
Yeah, no.
You did something else is structured wrong.
And we didn't actually make any CSS for that special, so it's nothing. So we're writing that.
But I feel like we're really deviating from like the whole iShop thing right now.
No, you're right. Let's move on. No, you're right. We need to not get sidetracked. This is time for this, guys. Sasha.
So calm.
Shut it.
All right. Move on. No more outside iShop talk only. All right.
Yeah, no problem.
All right. So now that we have our form fixed and Sasha's form fixed,
Thank you.
we can start setting up our endpoint for this. So right now, I don't think it's just console logging, right? And on Smith, it's probably inside of. Yeah, so we're just console. Oh, we have this props.sign up already. So we already made an action creator for it.
Yeah.
Oh, we were even calling. Were we getting the response back already?
Yeah.
Oh, sweet. We're ready to go. Oh, yeah, we were saying because we need the. Oh, yeah, because we did all the air handling and everything already. All right, we need to make a model. That's what we need to do now. All right, so. Inside of our DB folder, we're going to create another folder called models.
Where is it?
In the root directory.
Okay, right. Yeah. New folder.
Yep, new folder called models. And in that, we'll create a new file called users.js. And then, what information did we think we were going to need to store on our user? Let's find that picture. Let's see, we said ID, email, password, type, status. So we'll start by pulling in sequelize, sequelize equals require.
What does sequelize do again?
It's a communication between your backend and the database. It just makes working with the database a little bit easier. So we don't have to like write queries and stuff for everything. It creates an object and you just interact with the object, kind of like you guys did with Mongo and Mongoose.
Okay.
It's like Mongoose, but for MySQL.
But you can still do like relational things?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's called an ORM, Object Relational Model. So, and like if you guys have ever heard of like GraphQL, GraphQL is just a very fancy of that.
Yeah.
A little bit different, but kind of along the same lines. And then we need bcrypt. All right, why is my auto fucking complete not working? We installed all this stuff, right?
Auto what?
Yeah, my IntelliSense isn't working.
Ours is working.
Well, it wouldn't make sense if everybody's was broken at the same time.
Well, we did the same thing, so it should be broken at the same time.
No, it's just the computer.
Oh, Max.
Well, it's because it's VS Code. My bit Microsoft is the problem.
export dot.
All right, then we're gonna do module. There it goes. Exports, and then we'll pass the DB into this, and it'll be a function. And we'll say const user equals db.define, and then users. And then everything always needs an ID, so we'll give it an ID. And we'll say allow null false
Excuse me, thank you.
auto.
Put that shit on the top.
Is this one of the?
I have it.
Auto increment true. Primary key true. And then type sequelize dot integer. Right, then email allow null false type a SQL string. And then we want to make it so that there could only be one email. So we're going to say unique true. That way, if someone tries to save an email address that already exists, it'll prevent it from happening.
Because of that, line coding.
True, primary key true.
And then we'll do first name.
So you're essentially setting up a schema.
Yeah, you're building the table.
Okay.
Yeah, and then SQLize will run this, and then it'll check your database. If the user table already exists, it won't do anything. But if the user table doesn't exist, it'll build the user table based on everything you tell it right here.
So
It's really cool. It makes it a lot easier to like set up all the primary keys and indexing and all that shit.
right. Because before we did that on PHP MyAdmin, right? Like manually.
Yeah,
Oh.
this creates everything for you.
That's what
Allow null false type equals string. Last name. Oh, yes, we're just building an object with objects in it. It's just an object. Don't get caught up that we're like using SQLize or anything. It's still just an object.
allow null is basically just, or they have to be there and exist or not.
Yeah, if you allow null, then it could be empty. If we say allow null false, then it has to have something. It won't save it unless it has content.
Can you repeat what module.exports does?
It's like export default.
Okay.
And then last name type. SQL string. And then like if you want to specify a certain length, you could actually call this and pass it like, oh, I want this to be 34 characters long. But we're just gonna let everything default to, it defaults to 255. We're just gonna leave those. And then password.
Is this where you like hash?
We will, but not here. So this one, we will say how big it's going to be because we know exactly that it's going to be 60 characters every time because that's what the hash always generates, is 60 characters long. All right, and then we're going to do a PID, which is public ID. And we'll do this with any information that we might need to send an ID to the user. We want to create a public ID because if we just use the regular ID, they go in sequence, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So people could try and, if they see that you're just using single number IDs, like, well, if I get this information with the ID of 1, what happens if I change that 1 to a 2? So it gives people the ability to try hacking your system a lot easier. So anything that's potentially public facing, we're going to give public ID to, so that we could use the public ID to send to the front end, and then they could use it in their requests and stuff to access particular things. And then some of you might think, well, why have both? Why have a regular ID and a public ID? Well, the public ID is a very long string. We're going to use what's called UUIDs. And so they're extremely slow to look up in SQL. So we're going to use the ID for internal purposes to keep our database nice and fast. But anything that needs to be public facing, we'll use the public ID. And this will make more sense as we start using it. But that's just a little foreshadowing of what this is. So for the type on this one, we're going to use UUID. It's actually a data type. It's just a string. Uses essentially like hex values. And we'll set a default value to CQ UEL. And we're going to do UUID version 4. All right, and then we had a couple other things in our original schema.
Thank you.
Here, 1 second, guys. Where did it go? So it's like we wanted to keep track of the user type, as in if they're like admin, customer, vendor, different things. And then we also wanted to keep track of a status. So there's a couple ways we could handle it. It depends on how robust we want to make this. So if we want to make it sure it's pretty future proof, we would actually create separate tables for the type and statuses. So there'll be like an actual type, a user type table and like a user status table. That's the most robust way to do it. Either that or we could just use enum, which is just kind of like a set list of things you could set it to. Considering each user could only kind of have one type and one status, so it is more robust to have multiple tables.
And having multiple tables would also make the database run faster. Yes, sir.
Not necessarily. It's just it gives us a lot more control over shit we could do.
Okay.
It just makes it a lot more versatile, easier to maintain,
Okay.
and better for growth. Like if we plan to do more with the different user types, more with user statuses and stuff like that, we could easily, because all you gotta do is add more stuff to the table once it's already in place. Let's go and do it that way. Let's do it the quote unquote right way.
The right way is a better solution. I know you like Mongo.
Come on, man.
That's the right way.
So we're going to assume when this function is called that not only are we going to pass in the DB up here at the top, so we're going to put this in parentheses, we're also going to pass in user statuses and user types.
The user statuses?
Yeah. So user statuses and user types. Right, and then down at the bottom here, so you get the right place here. We're going to add, at the end of our object, we're going to add another object here as a second argument to our function call. And we're going to say paranoid is true.
What does that mean?
And we do that. So like when you delete stuff, it doesn't actually delete it. It does soft deletes on everything. So there'll be like a deleted at column that SQLite will automatically put there for us. And if we delete something, it'll add a timestamp. And like whenever it does any of its own queries, it'll never pull anything that's been deleted.
Okay.
So this allows us to like soft delete everything. So like you can keep a kind of a record of stuff that was deleted and stuff. And then eventually what you do is you do like a cron job or something that like once a month or something, you go through and clean out the database, actually delete it or move it to a separate table or separate database to house all the deleted items. So it just depends on how you want to house it.
So that one line just does all that?
The only thing it does is, yeah, it handles soft deletion. That's what it does. And you can still force delete stuff. So it doesn't like take away the ability to completely delete stuff. You can still override it and force delete it. But if you just use the standard delete methods, it just updates the deleted out column. And then down here, we're going to say, user, this actually should be user, not that it matters too much, but just be consistent. Users. So everybody notice up here, I changed my user const to users just because it's more accurate. And then down below all that initial creation, I'm going to say users dot belongs to user statuses. And then users belongs to user types.
I have a question.
Yes.
When you did at the top, const users equals db.define and then in string users lowercase, it doesn't matter that it's lowercase?
No, this is the name the table is going to be.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, this and this are completely unrelated. This is just a variable to hold what that returns. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all what this is called.
Okay.
All right, and then in this second config object here where we have paranoid true, we're going to actually add another property called hooks. And we're going to set that to an object. And we're going to say B for create async user. Yeah, so we're essentially giving it a function to call before, whenever you try and create a new user, it's going to call this function before it actually saves it to the database. And what we need to do is we need to actually hash our password. So we're going to say const hash equals await. I'm going to say bcrypt dot hash. I'm going to say user dot password. And then we want it to run it through 10 times.
What does that mean, the 10 times? Like running through the hash 10 times?
Yeah. Which I think is the default value anyways, but all their examples always put that there, so.
Why do you run it through the hash 10 times?
To make it as secure as possible.
Oh, okay.
It's like crypting.
Yeah, and this is bcrypt's documentation's recommendation is to put the 10 there. So.
Yeah, so when you see this long lines of like 30 characters.
Yeah, this will always bcrypt.
Exactly.
Bcrypt always creates a string that's 60 characters long. No matter what was passed to it, it will always return a string that's 60 characters long. If you give it the word "the," it will return a string 60 characters long. If you feed in the complete version of War and Peace, it will still give you 60 characters long.
Yeah. You read it?
Huh? Have I read War and Peace? A long time ago. All right, then we say user dot password equals that hash we just created.
User from lower letter string?
Yeah, from this right here, because we're
Ah,
inside
that
this function. So the user is going to be passed to us. We're catching it in this variable. Once again, we can call this anything we want, but it's the user, so it makes sense to call it that. And then one other thing we're going to do, since we're here inside of this nice little hook, we're going to say user dot email equals user dot email dot to lower case. Okay. Now, technically with MySQL, depending on the dialect you select, MySQL is actually case insensitive. So casing doesn't really matter. But this just guarantees that everything's uniform and you don't run into any issues.
Can you like touch a little bit more hooks in all like
Hooks are just usually something that hook into some kind of process. Like, and this create a different, like, it's kind of like the lifecycle method thing. At like different points of using this user model, like before we create one, this function gets called. There's also like before update, before delete. There's all kinds of different hooks you could do to add your own functionality before some action happens. And then like GitHub has hook is a very common thing. Slack has hooks. So like every time a message gets sent out, you could have it call your server, or when a pull request is made on GitHub, you could have it call your server and run some code or whatever. I don't know what you mean by that.
React hooks.
Oh, that's to hook in state to a functional component, which is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. But
The before create, that was the method that's already built into hooks or built in.
yeah, it's this is like a reserved name.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you go to like SQLize's documentation, it'll tell you like all the different. It lists all the ones out that are available.
Gotcha.
So they have a whole section right here on hooks. And then here's like before bulk create and so on and so forth. There's all these different things you could do. And it, like I said, it just gives you access to do some action before something happens or after something happens. Like I said, just like a lifecycle method in a component.
Yeah.
Same concept.
So SQL, as you said, is like GraphQL, where it's just communicating the queries and mutations between the database and the front end.
Well, and the back end.
Yeah, it's like okay.
Yeah. It's to help you in your back end to communicate with the database. Because like now, like with this hook here, this before create, whenever we create a new user, we don't have to worry about encrypting the password. It'll just happen now. So it's not, we don't have to like go through this big step of encrypting the password and any and everywhere we want to create a user. Eventually, when we get to a point where we want to update the user's password, we'll need to add another hook for like before update, check to see if it's the password that's being updated, and then encrypt that. But we'll wait till we actually get to that.
For sure.
We'll circle back around to it.
Okay.
And then we're going to add a couple little helper things onto here as well. So down here, we're going to say users dot prototype compare passwords. All right, and it's very important here. We need to use a regular function here. We cannot use a fat arrow function here. Candidate password. Okay, so this is the password that we wanted. So when someone's trying to log in, this is the password they're going to be trying to log in with. So what we want to do is we want to take this password and compare it with the actual user's password. So when we get the user model down the road, we could just say user.compare passwords, pass the password, then it's going to return true or false of whether or not the passwords match. So once again, this is a nice little helper function. This is a model level, not model level, instance. Is it model or instance? Mixing the two up now that I thought about it too much. Once you find a user, this method will be on it.
Got it.
Yeah, it's probably a better way to say it anyways.
Break it down.
All right, and then we're going to do your first manual promise where we're actually going to create the promise. Or maybe your first. So we're going to return a new promise. Promise is built into JavaScript now. All right, and then promise takes a callback function. This callback function will get a resolve function passed to it and a reject function passed to it. And then we're going to do bcrypt dot compare, and we're going to compare the candidate password with this dot password, So right here, the this.password, this is why we have to use a function, a regular old function. Because if we use an fat arrow function, this would have gotten overridden and it wouldn't be the user. So by using a function, everything inside of it, this is the user. If we use a fat arrow function, it would overwrite that. And the first time I ran into that issue, it took me like an hour or more to figure out what the fuck the issue was. Could figure out why this wasn't the user like it was supposed to be. In hindsight, it was blindingly obvious, but at the time, it was a lot less obvious. All right, and then compare takes a callback function. It will get either an error or is a match. And then if there is an error, we're going to return and we're going to call reject. All right, so in terms of a promise, you know, you have like dot then and catch. So reject will send it to the catch. Okay, you're saying it failed. Whatever you're trying to do failed. Okay, or if you do like if you use an async await and you have a try catch block, this will send it to the catch block. Okay, where you're rejecting it, it didn't work. Yes.
We didn't reject or resolve on this case.
Because I'm checking if there's an error, there's no reason to do anything else.
Oh, okay. Because I know normally the other way you do like try catch. I'm just curious.
Completely unrelated.
Okay.
All right, and then if there is no error, we want to call resolve and pass it is match, which can be true or false, depending if it's a match or not. So there you go. That's how you make a promise. So now when we call compare passwords down the road, which we'll actually use this pretty soon, we could do async await in front of it. You know, we could do await, and it'll wait till it gets its response till either reject or resolve is called. If resolve is called, when we do like const did password match equals compare passwords, compare password, we could use await there, and then once it gets the answer back, we'll get a true or false, because this is what's going to get passed to us, is right here. And you can put any data in here you want. You can put any object, anything like that. Do you need to see something, or?
No, we're good.
Okay. All right.
Belongs to is that basically connecting the user table to the other table?
To the other tables, yeah. It creates the indexing and stuff between the two tables.
Bless you.
All right, and then we need to do one more thing, and it's something that we're going to use across multiple models. So we're going to actually make essentially like a little helper file. So we're almost done. We got one more thing, but we do need to create this little helper file while we're here. So inside of models, we'll create another file. We'll call this one interfaces.js. And then this will be module exports. I'm going to export an object. And then we're going to do find by PID. So this way we could have a method on our models that we could just call find by PID, and we could pass it that big long public ID. Because by default, there's no method on it that does that. So if we had to do that, we'd actually have to do like the, find one and then pass it an object where PID equals some PID or something. It's not that much work, but this will make it even less work.
I'm just messing. PID is process ID and
Public ID.
ID, so
Public ID.
really
All right, and this will be a regular old function that will get the PID passed to it, and then any options that people want to use in the query. And then we'll default it to an empty object in case people don't pass in the options. And then we'll return this dot. So we're actually going to do the find one query here. So find one. And then we'll pass that the object. Some of this will make more sense once we actually start using SQLize more so you can see how all the querying works. And a lot of this is very probably abstract at the moment. But it'll come together, hopefully. All right, so then we'll deconstruct the options if any were passed in, options. And then at the end, we'll say where. And then where PID is equal to PID. Okay. So nice little simple helper function that is very powerful though.
Can you explain real quick what the options do again?
They do all kinds of stuff. When we start using it, you'll see.
Okay.
Yeah. It's just allows you to give different options on your query. Like you could tell it to like order, sort by, or like order by. You could tell it which attributes or which columns you want to. So like if you like query the database for a user and you only want like the first name, you can tell it just to give me the first name.
Okay.
So it's just all the different options for your query.
Cool.
And in users.js, why could you have used async await rather than a promise?
No, because we're creating a promise. Async await handles a promise.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, async await handles a promise. Here we're creating one.
So you do async await on things that return a promise.
Correct.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so here we're returning a promise.
Okay.
So we're actually defining a function that returns a promise here. Async await is just how to handle a function that does it. But yeah, you have to, if you're creating a function that returns a promise, this is how you have to do it.
So now,
I mean, actually, technically, we could have done. Actually, we could have done with async await, really, because as soon as you make this asynchronous, it returns a promise automatically.
Do we do that? Or is that too difficult to backtrack?
The only other problem is we'd have to turn bcrypt compare. We'd have to make bcrypt.compare return a promise. I mean, there's a way to actually do that.
Is it worthy of the hassle?
Yeah, let's not mess with it right now.
to make stuff return a promise, you either have to like define it like you said, or do dot then, right?
Dot then doesn't make something return a promise.
Oh, it just does it.
That's if something does return a promise already.
Okay.
Why did you put in those semicolons up there?
Because that's where they go.
If you're not gonna put it, it's not gonna mess it.
That is true.
It's just JavaScript.
But I like doing it the right way.
Sassy.
All right, so last thing we need to do is we need to pull in our find by PID that we just created. So up at the top, we'll say const, and we'll destructure it equals require from this directory interfaces. And we should be able to just directly pull off find by PID.
Interfaces, and then what we do.
Find my PID.
Should autocomplete. And then almost done. So the last thing down here at the bottom, we'll say users find. So this is at the model level. I got it right now. Okay, so this is at the model level. So when we import a model, we'll have access to find by PID, which will return an instance, and the instance will have compare passwords on it. That's like once you already found a user, which I said it that way, but I got it straight now that I thought about it. All right. Anyways, we're going to say users.find by PID is equal to find by PID that we imported up at the top. And then finally return users. So that will create a very robust, very functional user model and a very nice user table for us. But before we could do anything with it, we need to create the user statuses and user types models as well, because the user one is dependent on the other. So to do that, we'll create a new file.
In models?
Yep, we're creating a new model. So in models, we'll create a new file. And we'll say user underscore stat .js. And then we'll say const equals require sequelize. And then module dot exports equals. I don't think we're going to need to pass anything else in other than just DB. And I'll say const user statuses equals not new db.define and db.define user statuses. Yeah, we'll probably need a description. We'll do that. A description for what, like, what is this status for? Description. Well, null. We'll set this to true, so it can be null. And then type is equal to sequelize.string. And then we'll give it an ID. Allow null false on the ID. Auto increment. Primary key. And then the type will be seek was dot integer. And then for stuff like this, we'll usually use a machine ID. I'll describe what a machine ID is in 1 second. Allow null false. Type SQL string. And then it just needs some kind of name. which would be allow null to be false. And the type to be string. And honestly, like in a real world project, when you're setting this up, you would want to be more concise with like the length of the strings and stuff you'd allow. For this, we're just going to let everything default because it's not super important. But like usually there's like a whole person or like team of people that design databases and stuff and like figure out, okay, what's the most optimal, like what's the max characters this should be, giving us the most leeway. And, you know, there's people that figure all this shit out. We're not those people. None of us are DBAs in here, so. All right, and then just like before, we'll add the second configuration object. We'll say paranoid is true. The only last thing we need to do for this one is we need to, just like we did the find by public ID, we need to make a find by machine ID. So we could, the whole point of having that machine ID is so it's quasi-human readable, so we could search for certain statuses. So you'd have like a status, and the machine ID would be something like admin. And then if it was like a two-word status, what's the two-word status? Super admin. Then it'd be like underscore like that. Okay? So that's what a machine ID is. All lowercase, no special characters other than underscores, no spaces. Just something that's really easy for the computer to like search and very, you know. And it gives us a way to, in human terms, be able to identify specific statuses.
And the status like for the user, so if like you're a super admin, you're able to like add items, create items.
You can be able to do anything if you're a super admin.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So next, what we need to do is create the file so we can find stuff by machine ID simply. So we'll go to our interfaces. LMNOP. So find by MID will come first. So we'll add it to the top here. Find by MID. It's going to look essentially the exact same. It's going to be a function. Instead of the PID being passed in, it will be an MID. Options equals an empty object. Why is it getting mad? Weird. And then we'll say return this dot find one. Deconstruct the options. And then say where machine ID is equal to machine ID. This is a bad syntax somewhere.
The same thing.
Yeah, it is. It's just
I didn't get that.
Mine is working.
Yeah,
Yeah, it might be just the code editor then tripping. There's no reason why that. I mean, that should work. Oh, find out when it runs. All right, everybody go with their find by machine ID.
Yeah.
All right, so then down at the end, we'll say user statuses dot find by machine ID is equal to, oh, we forgot to import it. Top, const, curly brackets, equals, require, this directory interfaces. Find by machine ID. And that's what, once we have it imported at the top, then we'll go down and finish at the bottom what we were doing. User status dot find machine ID is equal to find by machine ID. And then finally, we will return user statuses. All right, one more thing, and then we can put it all together and test it, and then we'll take a break.
Scott, in the users.js, what is the prototype word after users? Like it says users.prototype.compare.
You don't know what prototype is, dude? Like seriously? Like that's a JavaScript thing.
Can you go up?
The prototype.
Please, are you messing with me?
No, dude, that's something you should know. That's like in the first 2 weeks of the class.
Can you go up?
Yes,
We're just importing. You guys need to learn how to do this stuff. Don't be blindly copying. Try kind of think about what the code's actually doing as much as you can. I know some of it's pretty foreign with the SQLite stuff, but this stuff should be somewhat making sense. You've been dealing with import statements for a while now.
When you do the require though, like and you're entering like a particular database, it doesn't auto-populate. I've noticed that. Or maybe it's just my computer.
It's just your computer, it does.
Okay. So like when you start like say this directory, it'll let you know like what to choose from.
Yeah. Mine wasn't when I first started. I had to restart. I had to close and reopen VS Code. Are you using VS Code?
Yeah.
Sometimes VS Code just does that, dude. It just craps out sometimes. But I do think I have also think I have like an NPM IntelliSense thing going on.
Nah, mine. Oh, someone wants to do it.
Oh, okay.
I heard you.
Heard you talking about.
Probably.
We all good?
Yeah.
All right. So we're just gonna, because our user, what was the other one we were gonna make? User statuses and user what?
types.
User types. Yeah. So statuses will be like active, banned, stuff like that. And then types will be like our admin or whatever. Okay, so we're just going to copy this whole file. And then we'll create a new file called user underscore types.js. And we'll paste it in. Now, a couple things we got to be careful for, though, with pasting is we got to make sure, most importantly, is that we change our table name. So db.define user types. And then just to make sure everything's clear, we'll say user types. I think everything else should be the same. It needs a description, an ID, a machine ID, a name.
The return at the bottom has to be changed too.
What's up?
The return at the bottom.
Yeah, and where we're doing the find. So we need to change these two places, user types and user types. Okay, there we get that double check. So db.define is user types. We changed our constant name to user types. So that means we need to update our constant use down here of user types and user types. Like I said, the database itself, the table should, I can't think of anything that would be different in it. So it's just storing a different set of information. We probably could have even made it one table and added like a type column and done like, that'd get messy though. Yeah, that would be a bad idea. It's better just to keep it separate to two separate tables. All right. All good here? All right, so now what we need to do is we need to bring this all together and see what kind of mess we created. All right, so inside of our models, we're going to create, oh, that error is bugging me.
Magic.
Yes.
Sorcerer.
There we go, fixed it. Okay. So inside of the models, we'll create everyone's favorite index.js.
And that's it.
What do you create?
Index. At the very top, we'll get the database. And that's going to come from backup directory. Okay, so if we remember, outside of models, we have this index file right here, and then module.exports are SQLized, which is our database.
Can I interrupt for a second?
I do mind.
Cool.
Same on this.
Stop, man.
Okay. Any of you guys want to volunteer to review memory matches for the juniors after lunch?
Yeah, we're stopping at lunch, so.
There you go. So you guys are officially free.
I do this for you guys, and you can't get a little help on your guys' end? Come on.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, Aaron. Okay.
Let me guilt trip them in for you, Cody.
Yeah, there we go. You're making eye contact with me. You're not.
I was waiting for somebody else.
Like asking for volunteers, and the man over here is like,
Yeah, I can do it, man.
That's what I thought. Thank you.
Yeah.
Was that a yes from Brandon?
Sweet.
Brandon loves to help, man.
How many do you need? Seniors.
Huh?
What about the seniors?
There's more juniors than seniors.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah, that was kind of a smaller class.
Yep.
Overview.
Okay.
Overview for students.
Huh? I already have somebody signed up for her.
I want to do shit.
Bummer. You can still give her shit. Go for it. Sure. Yeah? All right. And then you guys are just tapping out, not making eye contact. I feel that.
I'm just trying to understand the code right now.
Is that a big deal?
You can learn about prototypes. I'm just trying to understand the code, okay?
All right.
Fuck you, I just forgot, right?
I will assign you guys to a forecast.
I never know if you're messing with me or if you're serious, man.
That's a good
Prototype adds a method onto the constructor, to the original version of like an object.
I know the code, yeah. Thank you. I just forgot.
Versus like an internal method.
Gotcha.
Like it's a little bit more of a mute point nowadays because classes prototype all their methods on behind the scenes.
It's more ES.
Yeah. So back when you did where you did the actual created like a function, and then you did like all the this dots inside of it to like create a factory function.
Yeah. And
then you'd like do new whatever. Well, inside of that factory function, if you did like this dot my method equals a function, every time you use the new keyword on that, it would create a whole new version of that method.
Okay.
So if you had like 20 versions of that object, there'd be 20 copies of that same method. Whereas if you create the factory object or function, and then you prototype methods onto it after that, and then you create 50 instances of it, there's still only one instance of each method. So it's a much more better way to do it, much more efficient way to do it. And by default, ES6 classes, like when you add all the methods inside of a class, it's prototyping the methods on. So no matter how many times you use that class, there's still only one version of each of those methods. Cool? Cool. It was in like, week 2 or 3, but it's cool, man. It's cool.
That's like 3 months ago, brother.
I'm just kidding. Dude, like anything, if you don't use it, like you forget all that shit. But you will run across that stuff again. So just be aware. All right.
I actually felt all bad. It's not like shit, man.
Nah, man. I'm just giving you shit. Don't feel bad. Dude, I didn't learn that stuff. Dude, I didn't know like any kind of OOP for like at least like a year because like they didn't teach it when I came through here. It was like mentioned. I knew it existed.
Sure, when I was quietly waiting for you to get an answer.
I knew someone else was out there.
All right, so we're gonna import user statuses equals require. And this directory, user statuses. Now, when we require in user statuses, if we look back at the file really quick, is directly just exporting a function that is expecting us to pass the database to it, the database reference to it. So in our index file, we're going to just call what this returns and pass it our database reference. Okay, so doing this right here is calling this function that we're exporting. All right, then this function returns our user status model. Okay, so this being returned right here is what we're actually saving here. You guys with me on that?
Yeah. Is this file working synchronously?
Yeah. All this will run when like Node starts up though. Like this will run like one time and then that's it.
Okay.
So it'll do all this shit in the beginning and then everything will be all set up. All right, so now that we have user statuses, we'll pull in user, what was the other one? Types. And it's going to be pretty much the same thing. Require this directory, user types. We're going to call the function it returns. It needs the database. We'll pass it the database. And there's like different ways to do this. There's more programmatic ways you could create all this and shit. But this is kind of like a very, believe it or not, a straightforward way to do it. And then we'll say const, and we'll finally create our users. Now, the reason we did users last, because technically, alphabetically, users should have been first. But we need to create those other two things first, because if we look when we call this function, it's expecting us to pass in the database, user statuses, and then user types. You can see by my little message there. So we're going to pass it in the database. Then we're going to pass it in user statuses from above, and then user types from above. All right, and then finally we'll module dot export an object that has all these things in it. So we'll say users, user statuses, and user types. And then, of course, we're going to need a lot more tables and shit as we go, but we could keep adding to this. This is just a jumping off point so we get our user authentication working. And then finally, dun, dun, dun. right, and then finally over here in our index file directly inside of DB where we set up our database, we will require models, and then we're going to call sequelize.sync. So sequelize.sync, what it does is it takes all your, on startup, it'll take all your models, check your database to see if those tables exist. If the tables don't exist, it will build them. Now, if we ever want to reset our database, we could do force equals true, and that will wipe the database and rebuild the table. So if we make any changes to the models and stuff, you might have to do that. Now, there's a better way of handling migrations that we're definitely not going to get into, but we're just going to stick with this for now.
Can that softly reset the database, like softly? Or?
No, if you force true, it deletes everything. It wipes the database. You could force sync just specific tables if you want to. So we wrote a decent amount of code. So if we go to the terminal, see what's going on over here. Looks like it's working. So I'm going to restart mine just manually just to see. So nothing blew up. We should be able to so go to iShop, and if everything worked, we should, yeah. So we have like a users table. Here's our users table. You can see all the keys set up and everything. It's very nice. Very nice. Everything's all nice and indexed for us.
Scott,
Yes.
can I look at your users,
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm getting a. Are you getting like
It's not defined or something.
No.
Yeah. I don't know if I missed something there.
The users.js you said?
Yeah.
mine's saying that in my users file, it's pointing to sequelize integer. Sequelize is not defined. What? Yeah, it's spelled sequelize with two N's.
Oh.
If anybody needs any help debugging, let me know.
Mine says that cannot find module users. I don't know where
Where you see that?
That would have been in the models index file.
Right.
Scott, can you scroll down to 48?
How can you see? How can you see all the iShop structure?
Oh.
We got a PHP MyAdmin.
Yeah,
So go to BAM
Yeah, it is.
Okay, I got it.
yeah, I find it. But where is it?
in the iShop database.
Oh, let me fix it.
Which is your PHP?
You find the iShop table, and then you should see all the tables we created with all the columns and stuff that we defined in our models. So iShop, yeah. So yeah, you have nothing there. Go to. Did you look at your
In
terminal?
PHP Magic,
Uh-huh.
it should not show up the table.
And save
I'm
that.
just getting, I get tables, but I don't.
So I have to restart again.
Yes, you got errors.
Put anything
So
in
just scroll up.
I thought it was supposed to like auto.
Type is not a constructor. Function new type. Sequelize.
I don't think it's supposed to
Actually,
put anything in there. I think it's
Originating
supposed to
that call.
create the hand, which it looks
The
like.
module function.
Oh,
It's like,
okay, I see.
DB models index. So it's probably.
Okay.
It's in the user model. So the user model for this. Scroll up. Sequelize.
Have you used any of these courses, or have you looked into like taking these courses?
Sequelize.
I like
String.
Scott.
Not string. String in all caps.
Yeah, those are part of like syntax.
Yeah.
Like,
I don't know, just the way he says.
I think he's like
yourself.
on another day.
Think you're not like paying subscription because there's like a student. This is somebody else.
yeah, for sure.
Okay. Now go back to Facebook My Admin. Refresh it. Okay, there you go.
At least not right now.
Yeah.
Enjoy.
Once I get a job.
Why
When
that?
I deeper is with the subscription.
Why is it always?
He has like
That's-
all these courses.
That's from one of the versions of,
For sure.
that's just from one of the versions of PHP My Admin has a bug in it. But it should be fine. All right, everybody able to see their tables and shit? So once again, if you go to your PHP My Admin, you should have an iShop table, and in the iShop table, you should have users, and your table should look like this. Then we should have user statuses and user types, which should look pretty much the same.
Oh, okay.
And then, like, if you go to users, if you look down the bottom, you can see like all the indexing. This sets up for you, sets all the auto. It does all kinds of crap that, especially if you're not that proficient with MySQL, sets up a lot of nice stuff for you to help optimize your database. And then you can even, if you know what you're doing, you can take it even a step further than this. But this is good enough for what we're doing at the moment.
There's nothing wrong if my user status is all lower letters show up on the. Even I'm not sure if I ever make it lower letter, like user has statuses is with lower letters, and I see you have.
Yeah, the only issue is every time you use it, you have to make sure you call it the right thing. So whenever we're interacting with it and stuff, you're probably gonna typo it every time.
But why translate it lower letter?
Huh?
Why?
That's because you type it as a lower letter.
Where I can find it. Okay, where I can find this name.
You define that name, go to user statuses. Okay. You've changed it since they created the table. Sasha, like it doesn't lie what it did.
Yeah, I know, but I didn't change it. And there's another one, user statuses, user styles, what like that. I did change it.
Well, and types is fine, and statuses isn't. So something happened.
No,
here.
types is not fine. Types is the same thing. Lower letter here. Okay, user types, lower
Maybe it has something to do with working on Windows.
Looks the same.
I don't know. It's not that big a deal. I mean, like I said, if they're both the same, that's fine. It's just whenever. So like when, let's see what it did over here.
Oh, that's from this one.
all those things are okay.
That's where you can yell. And this came out fine. You know what? My tables might be lowercase too.
No.
Oh, not mine did. Do camel case.
Yeah, mine account.
These keys here matter more than anything. Don't worry, but the table names are fine. Just leave it, and don't change it because it'll fuck up SQL.
Okay,
Don't manually change anything.
okay.
Yes.
I think on my map, that you on web server, that you.
It doesn't matter. That doesn't matter.
Okay, so
Where
it's
it's at.
not showing up here then.
Then it didn't create it. Did you look at your terminal to see if it's throwing errors? Okay, so there's no error. So go to your code, all your files saved. Let's see.
No,
You did this in the, this is the
Oh,
wrong
no.
place.
excellent.
Copy those two
For the
things,
retreat.
and then those go in this index file.
Cody Dickman.
Oh,
This index file,
Yeah, after Colin said he'd be here.
and then after this,
so this index file,
Yeah, he had a thing with emergency,
just that.
yes.
but it was pretty small.
Server restarts.
yeah.
Should have already restarted, already saved it. But you have errors.
I'm just talking to this.
Unrecognized data type or field PID. So there's a typo. Go to users. UUID. To use. Go to dd.query. Okay, so now go back to your use from my admin. And then refresh it. Everyone good? Sweet. All right. I mean, everyone left already, but we'll take a quick break. When we come back, then we can actually create an account. Now that we have access to users, to create users, just create accounts now. So we'll continue this trip in a few minutes. If you're watching the video, this will continue in part 10. If you're watching it live, it'll be about 15 minutes or so. If you're not watching it live, you can instantly go to part 10. Lucky you. Thank you.